Karen's face flushed with rage as the animal control officer handed her the citation. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the document, crumpling it in her fist. "This is unacceptable," she shrieked, her voice piercing the otherwise tranquil cul-de-sac. "My dog has every right to bark on my own property." The officer remained stoic, unmoved by her outburst. "Ma'am, multiple neighbors have filed noise complaints about your dog's excessive barking. I'm required to issue this citation per the HOA bylaws." Karen's gaze darted frantically around the street, searching for allies, but the surrounding neighbors averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. They'd grown weary of her constant confrontations. "You can't do this to me," she spat, her voice quivering. "I'll have your job for this." The officer simply shook his head. "The decision has been made, ma'am. I suggest you address the noise issue before it escalates further." With that, he turned and headed back to his vehicle. Karen stood trembling, her knuckles white from gripping the citation. She glared at her next-door neighbor, Sarah, who had been the one to lodge the latest complaint. Sarah avoided eye contact, hurrying inside and closing the door behind her. Karen's lip quivered as she stormed back to her own house, slamming the front door with a resounding thud. Inside, she paced the living room, her mind racing. This was an outrage. How dare those petty, small-minded neighbors conspire against her? Didn't they understand that her precious Daisy had every right to express herself? Daisy, sensing her owner's distress, let out a series of sharp barks. Karen spun around, pointing an accusatory finger at the dog. "See? You see what they've done to us," she cried. "They're trying to take you away from me." Daisy whimpered, cowering as Karen's voice rose to a shrill scream. Karen sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. In that moment, a plan began to form in her mind. If the neighbors wanted a war, then a war they would get. She would show them the true meaning of retaliation. No one crossed Karen Huntington and got away with it. Wiping her eyes, she stood and strode purposefully to the kitchen, retrieving a bottle of red wine from the countertop. She poured a generous glass, the liquid sloshing over the rim as her hand trembled. "Don't worry, Daisy," she muttered, taking a long, fortifying sip. "Mommy's going to make things right." The next morning, Sarah peered out her kitchen window, sipping her coffee. Her eyes narrowed as she watched Karen across the street. The older woman was marching back and forth on her front lawn, waving her arms and shouting into her phone. Sarah sighed, already dreading the inevitable confrontation. It was the same routine every time. Karen would rage and complain, then somehow manage to twist the situation to make herself the victim. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Karen came storming up the driveway, her face contorted with fury. "You," she spat, jabbing an accusatory finger at Sarah. "This is all your fault." Sarah steeled herself, setting down her mug. "Good morning, Karen. What seems to be the problem?" "Don't play innocent with me," Karen shrieked. "You know damn well what the problem is. That citation from animal control, it's because of your stupid complaint, isn't it?" Sarah raised a placating hand. "Karen, please. The barking has been disruptive for the entire neighborhood. I was simply following the proper channels to address it." "Proper channels?" Karen scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is my home, and I'll do as I please. You and the rest of these nosy busybodies have no right to tell me how to live." "The HOA bylaws," Sarah began, but Karen cut her off with a dismissive wave. "The HOA can go to hell," she snarled. "I pay my dues, and that means I can do whatever I want. You're all just jealous because I have a bigger house and nicer things than you." Sarah felt her patience wearing thin. "Karen, this isn't about jealousy or property values. It's about being a considerate neighbor. The barking is disruptive. And disruptive." Karen interrupted, her voice rising to a shriek. "Daisy is my baby, and she has every right to express herself. You people are just too uptight to appreciate true freedom. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Karen was already storming back down the driveway, muttering curses under her breath. As she reached her car, she whirled around, fixing Sarah with a venomous glare. Mark my words, Sarah, you're going to regret this. No one makes a fool of Karen Huntington and gets away with it. With that, she yanked open the car door and peeled out of the driveway, the tires screeching against the pavement. Sarah watched her go, a growing sense of unease settling in the pit of her stomach. She had a feeling this was far from over. Over the next few days, the tension in the neighborhood palpably escalated. Whenever Sarah stepped outside, she would catch glimpses of Karen glaring at her from behind drawn curtains. The older woman's Rottweiler Daisy seemed to be barking louder and more frequently than ever before. Sarah tried to go about her business as usual, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if Karen was plotting her next move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, one morning, Sarah opened her front door to find a manila envelope wedged into the doorframe. Puzzled, she retrieved it and carried it inside, her heart pounding. Carefully, she slit open the seal and appended the contents onto her kitchen table. A stack of papers spilled out, along with a handwritten note. Dear neighbors, the note began, the words scrawled in a shaky, erratic script. I've been left with no choice but to take drastic measures. You have forced my hand, and now you will all pay the price. Sarah's brow furrowed as she scanned the documents. They appeared to be legal documents, filled with dense, technical language. Towards the bottom of the stack, a familiar logo caught her eye, the insignia of the Homeowners Association. A sinking feeling of dread settled in the pit of her stomach as she quickly flipped through the papers. They were petitions. Petitions to have her and several other neighbors fined or evicted from the community. Sarah's hands trembled as she set the documents down, her mind racing. Karen had gone nuclear, weaponizing the HOA's own rules and regulations against them. This was no idle threat. She was dead serious. Hurrying to the phone, Sarah began frantically dialing her neighbors, one by one. She had to warn them, to rally them to action before Karen's scheme could gain any traction. As the line connected, she steeled herself, preparing to deliver the chilling news. Karen had declared war, and they were all caught in the crossfire. The following evening, a small group of concerned neighbors huddled around Sarah's kitchen table, poring over the ominous stack of HOA petitions. This is insane, murmured Mrs. Petrovna, shaking her head in disbelief. How can she just accuse us like this? Sarah grimly surveyed the group. Karen's playing dirty. She's trying to use the HOA's own rules against us. Fines, probation, even eviction. A middle-aged man named Mr. Nguyen spoke up, his brow furrowed in concern. But surely the HOA won't just rubber stamp these petitions without due process, right? There has to be some way to fight this. Sarah let out a heavy sigh. That's the problem. The HOA tends to side with longtime residents like Karen, and she's got a history of bullying and intimidation tactics. The group fell silent, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily upon them. This was no mere neighborhood squabble. It was an all-out war, with their very homes and livelihoods hanging in the balance. Finally, an elderly woman named Mrs. Takahashi cleared her throat. So what do we do? We can't just sit back and let her do this to us. Sarah nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. We fight back. We need to rally the rest of the neighborhood, build a case against these petitions, and show the HOA that Karen's the one causing the real disturbance. The others murmured in agreement, their expressions resolute. They would not go down without a fight. All right, here's the plan. Sarah began, leaning forward to outline their strategy. As the meeting wore on, the group grew more animated, their voices rising with each passing minute. Outside, a curtain twitched in the window of Karen's house, her icy gaze fixed upon the defiant gathering. The following evening, A small group of concerned neighbors huddled around Sarah's kitchen table, poring over the ominous stack of HOA petitions. "This is insane," murmured Mrs. Petrovna, shaking her head in disbelief. "How can she just accuse us like this?" Sarah grimly surveyed the group. "Karen's playing dirty. She's trying to use the HOA's own rules against us. Fines, probation, even eviction." A middle-aged man named Mr. Nguyen spoke up, his brow furrowed in concern. "But surely the HOA won't just rubber stamp these petitions without due process, right? There has to be some way to fight this." Sarah let out a heavy sigh. "That's the problem. The HOA tends to side with longtime residents like Karen, and she's got a history of bullying and intimidation tactics." The group fell silent, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily upon them. This was no mere neighborhood squabble. It was an all-out war, with their very homes and livelihoods hanging in the balance. Finally, an elderly woman named Mrs. Takahashi cleared her throat. "So what do we do? We can't just sit back and let her do this to us." Sarah nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "We fight back. We need to rally the rest of the neighborhood, build a case against these petitions, and show the HOA that Karen's the one causing the real disturbance." The others murmured in agreement, their expressions resolute. They would not go down without a fight. "All right, here's the plan," Sarah began, leaning forward to outline a strategy. As the meeting wore on, the group grew more animated, their voices rising with each passing minute. Outside, a curtain twitched in the window of Karen's house, her icy gaze fixed upon the defiant gathering. The tension in the room was palpable as the HOA board members huddled in whispered discussion. Sarah and the other residents sat in anxious silence, their hands gripping the edges of their seats. Finally, the board president, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Wilkins, stepped forward and cleared her throat. "After carefully reviewing the evidence and testimony presented here today, the HOA board has reached a decision." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "We find that the complaints against Miss Huntington's dog are valid and in accordance with our community bylaws." A collective gasp rippled through the room, and Sarah felt a surge of hope. But Mrs. Wilkins raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "Furthermore, we have determined that Miss Huntington's retaliatory petitions against her neighbors are an abuse of the HOA's processes. As such, we are imposing a fine and placing her on probation." Karen's face contorted with rage, and she sprang to her feet, her chair clattering to the floor behind her. "This is an outrage," she shrieked, her eyes wild. "You can't do this to me. I won't stand for it." Mrs. Wilkins regarded her coolly. "If the disturbances continue, Miss Huntington, we will have no choice but to pursue further disciplinary action, including potential eviction from the community." Karen's mouth worked soundlessly, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. Slowly, she sank back into her chair, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The other residents erupted into cheers and applause, relief and triumph etched on their faces. Sarah allowed herself a small smile, knowing that their hard work and determination had paid off. As the meeting adjourned, Karen remained in her seat, her gaze fixed on the floor. The other neighbors gave her a wide berth, sensing the palpable aura of fury and humiliation that radiated from her. Sarah paused by the exit, her eyes meeting Karen's. For a moment, the two women's gazes locked, a silent battle of wills playing out between them. Then, without a word, Karen turned away, her face a mask of seething resentment. Sarah knew this was far from over. Karen was a formidable adversary, and she wouldn't give up her fight easily. But for now, the neighborhood had won a hard-fought victory, one that left them cautiously optimistic, but ever vigilant. The days that followed the HOA meeting were marked by an uneasy peace in the neighborhood. Karen had retreated into her home, her dogs barking noticeably absent, as if the animal too could sense the shift in the atmosphere. Sarah and the other residents went about their business, relieved but wary. They knew that Karen's defeat was likely only temporary, that she was biding her time, plotting her next move. Sure enough, the calm was shattered one afternoon when Sarah received an unexpected knock at her front door. Peering through the window, she was surprised to see a well-dressed man standing on her porch, a briefcase in hand. Cautiously, she opened the door. "Can I help you?" The man offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is David Fielding, and I'm an attorney representing the Huntington family." He paused, his expression turning serious. "I'm here to inform you that Miss Huntington is filing a civil lawsuit against you and several of your neighbors." Sarah felt her heart drop. A lawsuit? On what grounds? "Defamation, libel, and intentional infliction of emotional distress," Fielding replied, his tone matter of fact. "Miss Huntington claims that your false accusations and harassment have caused her significant harm, both financially and personally." Sarah's mind raced, struggling to comprehend the gravity of the situation. But everything we presented at the HOA meeting was the truth. We were simply following the proper channels to address a legitimate issue. Fielding shrugged. "Be that as it may, Miss Huntington is seeking substantial damages, as well as a restraining order to prevent any further harassment from you or your fellow neighbors." Sarah felt a surge of outrage. This is absurd. She's the one who's been terrorizing the entire community, and now she's trying to silence us. "I'd advise you to consult an attorney, ma'am," Fielding said coolly. "Miss Huntington is quite serious about this matter." With that, he turned and strode back to his car, leaving Sarah standing on her porch, her mind whirling. Quickly, she shut the door and hurried to the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the numbers. She had to warn the others. Karen had escalated the conflict to an entirely new level, and they were all in grave danger. In the days that followed, the neighborhood was consumed by a frenzy of activity as Sarah and the other residents scrambled to mount a legal defense against Karen's lawsuit. They pooled their resources, hiring a seasoned attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Together, they pored over the evidence, meticulously building their case to counter Karen's claims of defamation and emotional distress. It was a grueling process, filled with endless meetings, mountains of paperwork, and tense negotiations. But the residents were determined to stand their ground, unwilling to let Karen's deep pockets and ruthless tactics cow them into submission. As the court date approached, the tension in the community reached a fever pitch. Neighbors who had once been strangers now found themselves united in a common cause, their once quiet cul-de-sac transformed into a battleground. Finally, the day of the trial arrived, and the small courtroom was packed to the brim with residents, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Sarah listened with bated breath as their attorney methodically dismantled Karen's case, presenting a damning array of evidence that painted a clear picture of the older woman's harassment and abuse of the HOA system. In the end, the judge's ruling was swift and decisive. He rejected Karen's claims, dismissing the lawsuit with prejudice and awarding the residents a substantial sum in legal fees. As the gavel fell, a cheer went up from the crowd, relief and triumph washing over their faces. Karen sat in the front row, her expression a mask of pure fury, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. When the judge called for order, the residents fell silent, their attention fixed on the bench. This court finds the actions of Miss Huntington to be a clear abuse of the legal system, fueled by petty vindictiveness and a disregard for the well-being of her community, the judge declared, his voice stern. Her continued harassment and attempts to retaliate against her neighbors are unacceptable and will not be tolerated. He fixed Karen with a piercing gaze. "Miss Huntington, you are hereby ordered to cease all further legal action against the residents of this community. Any violation of this order will result in severe consequences, including potential jail time." Karen's face contorted with rage, but she remained silent, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As the judge adjourned the court, the residents erupted into cheers, embracing one another with giddy relief. Sura watched the spectacle with a small, satisfied smile. They had won. Against all odds, they had triumphed over Karen's petty tyranny. It was a hard-fought victory, but one that would ensure the peace and harmony of their neighborhood for years to come. As the residents filed out of the courtroom, Karen remained seated, her eyes downcast. For once, the HOA Karen had been silenced, her reign of terror finally brought to an end.